According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, also known as EPA, both the 1980 Superfund law and the 1986 Federal Community Right to Know Act requires reporting of releases of a hazardous substance that exceeds a reportable quantity within a 24-hour period. In 2008, all farms were relieved from reporting hazardous substance air releases from animal waste under the Superfund law, and only large concentrated animal feeding operations were subject to the Community Right to Know Act. However, controversy became known last April when environmental groups believe smaller CAFOs should also be subject to water quality regulations. Nebraska Extension Ag and Water Law Specialist Dave Aiken joined us on Monday to discuss how Congress exempted livestock manure emissions reporting from the federal Superfund law as part of the 2018 federal budget bill.
Federal environmental laws require releases of hazardous substances to be reported under two different laws. Livestock groups have traditionally not been subject to this except for large confined operations, but an environmental group went to court and the court said that all livestock operations are subject to it, and so Congress passed a fix as part of the Budget Act, and we thought we were going to have to report, but now we won't.
According to Dave, there are two federal environmental laws that require the release of hazardous substances to be reported.
There's the 1980 Superfund law, and that requires reporting to the federal government of releases, and then the Community Right to Know law, which was passed in 1986, extended the reporting requirements to include local emergency responders. So if there's a release of a hazardous substance that's dangerous, emergency response people can control it so that people don't get sick or die.
According to the EPA, two of the most common hazardous substances emitted from animal waste are ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. These common hazardous substances require reporting if released to the air in amounts greater than or equal to the reportable quantity of 100 pounds within a 24-hour period. In addition, if any other hazardous substances above their designated reportable quantities are released to the air within a 24-hour period, they also would need to be reported. We further asked Dave if there were any ag exemptions in either of these statutes.
No, when these laws were passed, we were still kind of in the early phase of environmental laws and didn't have an ag carve out. However, EPA in 2008 said, well, we don't need reports from farmers because it's not going to be anything dangerous to people, so why bother? So they established an exemption for ag operations. Environmental groups took that to court, and last year federal court said that there was no ag exemption, and so livestock producers did have to report.
However, reporting rules recently changed on March 23, 2018, when Congress exempted livestock manure emissions reporting from the federal Superfund law as part of the 2018 federal budget bill.
EPA estimated that there were some 44,000 livestock producers who would be required to be part of this reporting system, and EPA said that there's no reason. We don't want the information. We don't need it. And Congress finally agreed and said, yes, our intent was never to require farmers to report emissions from livestock waste, and so they changed the law, and so there's now the farms that have not been reporting do not need to report, and this is a big sigh of relief.
As Dave noted, the farms that have not been reporting livestock air emissions will continue to not report. However, it is important for livestock producers to understand who is now required to report.
Well, before this kerfuffle all started, large CAFOs, or large concentrated animal feeding operations, were required to report, and that goes back at least to 2009. So they've been in this system for a long time. And so the law that was just passed in March, that only applies to the new ones who would have been required to report if Congress hadn't acted. And so the large ones that have been subject to it are still subject to it, but the smaller ones are not.
Now that there are no new reporting requirements for livestock manure emissions, we further asked Dave why those environmental groups brought awareness on smaller CAFOs.
There are environmental groups that think that all livestock operations should be subject to state or federal water quality regulation. And so far, it's only the large animal feeding operations that are subject to it, although some of the others may be brought in, but not as a general rule. But the environmental groups have thought that, well, if we can't get EPA to regulate them, at least if we can force EPA to give us their addresses, then we can keep an eye on them. And if we think that there's some problem, then we can, sound the alarm or whatever. And so this has been this issue of getting the addresses of the smaller livestock producers have been raised in a number of different lawsuits under different laws in the federal courts, and this was the first major one that they won. And if Congress hadn't acted, then when they reported, they would have tried to start getting those addresses for the smaller livestock operations.